activity, treat narcolepsy and ADHD. So those are narcotics, Adderall, Ritalin, Concerta. Many symptoms can mirror common signs of aging: memory loss, disorientation, lack of balance. There is a lot of adverse effects. So a lot of these are chronic conditions, increased amount of medications, low body weight, and decreased renal function. Polypharmacy is probably one of the most common problems in the elderly. 40% of the elderly over 60 take at least 5 medications. Could be excessive or subtherapeutic dosing, improper drugs, untreated indication, drug interactions, lack of indication, lack of monitoring. And then there's some other, I'm not going to get into all the different types of medications and their side effects, but I will go through very quickly in the community the pharmacist's opportunity to identify certain things. So in a retail pharmacy, you have the ability to identify if a caregiver, number one, comes to the pharmacy to pick up refills. Number two, if the caregiver selects which meds to pick up and which to leave behind. Number three, the conversation with the caregiver can easily identify clues regarding abuse. You could also, if the elderly is with the caregiver, you could see how they deal with them. You can kind of spot physical signs, see if they're anxious, they're worried, things like that. Routine review of the patient profile. Certain medications could be refilled exactly on time. So narcotics, very popular, especially if the caregiver has their own intentions, and other meds haven't been refilled for months. So one final example, in a community pharmacy, so there's a caregiver and an elderly, and pharmacists are required to give consultation, and the caregiver is denied by, the consultation is denied by the caregiver. The caregiver speaks for the client. The caregiver buys their own personal items using the elderly's credit card. Also, if the elderly is slow, they could be grabbing them or rushing them or not allowing them to have any interaction with the pharmacist, picking up which medication is too expensive and speaking loud. So they may want to fill the narcotic or the pain med and then, oh, you don't need the hypertension med, that we can come back. So caregivers are not always aware of branded generics. They could double dose to treat different ailments, and they could give extra sedative and agitation meds to control dementia. And just finally, strategies for prevention. So there could be prescription diaries, so you can list medications, how to take them wisely, questions for the doctor or the pharmacist. Pharmacists can provide very clear information and advice how to take medication properly, and also consult whether OTCs can interact, different medications in the profile. And then last, be aware of fraud or diversion for looking for false or altered RXs, and be aware of doctor shopping. So one last final point is doctor shopping is a big problem in the community, so a caregiver will fill different meds at different pharmacies and use different doctors to write the same prescription and fill them at 2 different places. So the pharmacist will see like duplications on their end and be able to tell, okay, you just filled this 5 days ago, different doctor, you know, same narcotic. So that's going to show a very big response. And that's it. So thank you very much.
So I thought I would talk to you a little bit about what is the role of the doctor in all of this. You know, today in medicine we talk about screening. We screen for, we do colonoscopies, we do mammograms, we talk about blood pressure, we talk about diabetes. Very little is talked about in the literature about screening for elderly abuse. If you look over the last 4 or 5 years, you're starting to see more and more articles in the literature about it, and an increasing awareness that it really is quite important. As we said before, 10% of the elderly are abused each year in America. And we know that the population of the elderly is going to go from like 10% to 30% over the next 20 years. We also know that these people, the elderly, have a much greater interaction with the healthcare system than many other people in our population. They go to nursing homes, They go to emergency rooms, they go to hospitals. And it really is incumbent upon us to be aware that we have to be looking for this. If we're not looking for it, we're not going to find it. And I thought today, since you already know about the different types of abuse and something about the definition of abuse, I thought I'd tell you something about the screening for it. That there are tools now that have been developed for screening for abuse. The one that I like the best is called the Elder Abuse Suspicion Index. Is anybody aware of that?
No.
And it's one of the few tools that's been validated in medicine to help have a predictive value that there may be elderly abuse going on in this family or this patient. And the kinds of questions that you ask reveal that we're starting to understand more and more about what abuse is. So there are 5 simple questions. One is, have you relied on people for any of these things over the past year? Something like bathing, dressing, shopping, banking, or eating your meals. Another was, has anybody prevented you from getting food, clothing, medication, glasses, hearing aids? Has anybody upset you or talked to you in a way that made you feel ashamed? Has anybody tried to force you to sign a paper, transfer money? And finally, has anybody made you afraid by the way they touched you? Well, these are all questions that obviously touch upon the concept of abuse. The 6th component of this is the doctor and his ability to observe what's going on in the interview. Does the patient look at you? Is he cower? And of course, are there any signs of obvious physical abuse? There's another tool called the Vulnerability Assessment Tool, which I'm not going to go into, but it's the same kind of concept, these kinds of questions. But somebody has to ask the question. If they don't ask the questions, you're not going to be aware. So then I looked at, there's something called the United States Preventive Services Task Force. And this is the group that creates all the guidelines in America for all the different kinds of diseases that we screen for. So they came out that there was insufficient evidence to screen for elderly abuse, which I found very surprising. On the good side is the Joint Commission, the National Center on Elder Abuse, the American Academy of Neurology, and the AMA all say that we should be screening and we should be inquiring about abuse. Of course, if we're thinking if somebody's being abused or not, we need to know, do they have capacity? If they have capacity, you can talk to that individual. If they don't, you need to find out who the power of attorney is. Then you have to determine if the power of attorney, in fact, is acting on behalf of that patient or not. So it's a very complicated process. We know something about risk factors for abuse, and I find it very helpful to divide into 4 different categories. One is the risk factors relating to the person himself or herself. How old are they? We know that people over 80 are at a higher risk of being abused. Some studies show that women are more likely to be abused. Some studies talk about cognitive impairment. If you have Alzheimer's, you may or may not be more likely to be abused, but if you have a short memory deficit, the answer is yes, you will be. Functional dependence. Do you need somebody else to help you get around the house? Do you need somebody with your bathing, your toileting, your hygiene? Are you frail? Do you have a low income? These are all issues that are related to the person being abused. But you also have to look at the person who might be doing the abusing. If the person living in that home, are they an alcoholic? Do they have drug abuse problems? There's more likely to be an increased potential for abuse. You have to look at the relationship between the people in the family to the person being abused. If it's a family with a lot of disharmony and a lot of conflict, you're more likely to find out that there's abuse in that family. And then, of course, you have to look at the environment. Are they living with others? Are they living alone? Are they isolated? One thing I found that was interesting is that people who live alone might be more likely to have financial abuse, while people who are living with groups or with other family members might be more likely to have physical abuse. So I tried to talk to you a little bit about the tools that we use to screen for abuse. And I thought just a little bit about getting a history that whenever we try to elicit a history of abuse, we don't ask about a specific issue. We don't say, how did you get this bruise? Or who cut you? You say something very open-ended. How did this happen? Can you tell me what the events were that created this problem for you? And as the pharmacist pointed out, you need to know about their medications. You need to know what they're taking. You need to know if they're taking narcotics. You need to know what kind of drugs they're taking, because polypharmacy is a major issue for the elderly. We know that if you take more than 4 or 5 medicines, you have an increased potential for getting dementia, for having falls. All these are issues related to pharmacy. Finally, for the doctor, you do your physical. Do they have evidence of trauma? Do they have cuts? Do they have scrapes? Do they have bruises? Do they have broken bones? Do they have chemical restraints? Weight loss, dehydration. So these things seem very obvious for abuse, but I'm going to show you that you have to be aware that there are medical problems that can simulate these issues as well. If somebody has a blunt trauma, they could be having an allergic reaction to a medication. They could be taking a medicine that might cause bleeding, such as we all know about Coumadin and blood thinners. If they have a burn, they could have a very serious allergic reaction to a drug. It may not be a burn at all. You could even have something as serious, something called Stevens-Johnson syndrome, which is a terrible dermatitis associated with medication. But for all intents and purposes, when you look at it, it might appear to be abuse. We can talk about chemical restraints, drugs that narcotize you. But also, you could be, you could just be renal failure, and the drugs that you're taking normally now have achieved toxic levels. So the doctor really has to evaluate, do some blood work, check renal function. Broken bones. We often see, this is often assumed to be due to abuse, but we also know that people have osteoporosis. We see this all the time where a bone breaks, and it's not due to abuse. And we talked a little bit about pressure sores, and of course pressure sores, they can occur because of nutrition, malnutrition. They can occur because you're lying in one position for a long period of time. You have to be looking for these. If you suspect abuse, you're going to try to interview the caregiver separately from the patient, because often the caregiver can be the abuser. So if you think there is intervention, I think we raised this point before, you need to contact, we need to contact Adult Protective Services. And from there, we need to come up with a plan for the patient. We need to come up with a way of protecting them, such as, bringing them to Jewish home. And these are things that we're not even aware of right now. I think we need to, this kind of a day is a wonderful day because it's going to raise everybody's awareness. But we need to, this all starts with being aware that there is an issue, screening for the issue, thinking about it, and then from there we can go on. Well, that's really all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I open it up for questions, I want to make just a couple of follow-up points with respect to some of the things that our panelists said. And Pete, if you have a problem, even though you're only 50, we'll take you. Don't worry. You have to come. But I do want to follow up on one of the things that you said, which is Bergen County is a more affluent area and the abuse maybe isn't happening. I would tell you that abuse is an equal opportunity problem. And if you read anything about recent public cases like a Brooke Astor, or if you go on YouTube and watch Mickey Rooney's testimony in front of the Senate, you see that elder abuse can happen to anyone regardless of their resources, regardless of whether they've had a successful career or they're cognitively intact. It is a question of being in a situation where someone is isolating you, taking advantage of you. I think the issue of affluence, unfortunately, is an issue that you can hide it better. Then maybe it's not so visible, but it may be there. And someone like Dr. Gross is more likely to pick it up, or Mr. Lissner, because they have some connection with that person, but it isn't that it isn't happening. One of the things we say when we train first responders, police and fire, if you're called to a home, also look around, look in the refrigerator, see what really is going on in that household. We deliver holiday meals, Meals on Wheels, hot kosher meals on the holidays to people who are shut-ins, who don't have resources. We deliver over 300 meals. And we have our volunteers asking questions and looking around and making observations, because we're looking for not only signs of abuse or neglect, but we're also looking for, are there other things that we could assist them with? So these are important things. With respect to the home health issue, and I appreciate Mike's comments about home health aides, I will tell you that while that's certainly a potential source of an abuser, if you look statistically, most abusers are a family member. And those of us who have worked in this space for a little while know that unfortunately it often is a child or a grandchild and sometimes a spouse who is, for whatever reason, frustrated, desperate, unhappy, entitled, all of those things that play out. I'm not putting in a plug here, but I will say that if you need a home health aide, the at-home service of the Jewish Home Family, all of our aides are background checked and drug tested and thoroughly screened and thoroughly trained. Where people do get in trouble sometimes is they hire somebody who's, you know, local and inexpensive and off the street, and then you don't know what you're hiring. But oftentimes that abuser is an individual who is known, unfortunately, to the older adult. There are lots of things that result in elder abuse, and I think Harvey's point is extremely well made, which is that our goal is for all of us to raise our level of awareness. You know, the conversation about child abuse in this country 20 or 30 years ago was at a very low level. But today, if you take your child to the pediatrician with anything that looks funny, they ask you what it did. Do you feel safe? Did something happen? Women, when you go to the OBGYN, they say, are you safe in your home? Do you feel comfortable? You go in the ladies' room and there are little tags that you can pull off if you don't feel safe. We don't do that with our older adults. You know, we have enlightened physicians who are asking those questions and enlightened attorneys who are raising those issues. But way too many people are not. Way too many people have their eyes either closed or are not paying attention. They get impatient with the older adult who can't answer a question. They listen to the caregiver and not the older adult. And when we see someone with an injury that looks suspicious and the adult child says, they're so clumsy. Well, sometimes it's more expedient to believe that response than ask those probing questions. So this is not a witch hunt. This is really an opportunity for us to open our eyes to the issues that are going on around us, because they're really, really important issues, and issues that pertain to quality of life for so many of our older adults, both here and across the country. So we have a few minutes for questions. Do you have any questions of our panelists? Yes.
Dr. Gross, I love the questionnaires you're talking about, but do you take the patient in alone without the caregiver and ask these questions? Because I know when my father, who was cognitively fine, an elderly man, and I took him to a doctor, and they spoke to me. And my father, you know, I said my father can answer. I don't know how he feels. And I think that, do you take them in alone when you ask these questions?
So
or is the
first
caregiver present?
First of all, this whole screening process is something relatively new. You know, it's not something I'd like to be saying I've done it for 10 years, but I haven't. But yes, I think the point I made in my talk was that if you suspect abuse, you do separate the caregiver from the patient. But normally speaking, if I don't suspect it, I ask the patient whether they want the family member to remain in the room or not. And then that's up to them. And the other thing is, if I do, I make sure the patient answers the questions and not the caregiver or the relative.
Along those lines, also from the law enforcement point of view, the script that the Bergen County Prosecutor's Office Special Victims Unit, and as well as I believe APS, the questions, they do interview both separately, but a lot of it, because you can't get, you know, you don't know what you're getting from the patient sometimes. There are, you know, mental capacity issues. For example, my great-grandmother lived with us for a little while when we were growing up, and she would have moments where she would go outside and feed the chickens on her farm back in Yugoslavia 80 years ago. So if you ask her questions at any particular moment, there were different answers. And, you know, my father would put her in her bedroom and she said, "Why are you hitting me? Stop beating me." And, you know, you're 3 feet away from her. But what we try to do is elicit, we're not saying, are you beating, are you abusing the patient? It's what's going on. You know, if you can get them to admit that they're frustrated, that this is very difficult for them, they're having, you know, they're under a lot of stress. Those are indicators that there may be something more going on.
Yes.
It was a terrific panel, thank you. One thing that just jumped out at me, and I think it was a police officer said, that there's something financial abuse and you were going to eventually report it and you weren't sure where to report it to? I don't know if I
That was the home health aid.
right.
The home health aid.
That
license.
concerned me because we rely.
No, that was not as part of the investigation. That was, once the investigation was concluded and I charged her, and, you know, innocent until proven guilty, I'm obligated to notify the licensing agency that this person breached their responsibilities. And this particular case, I didn't know who that agency was. I would have had to reach out for licensing issues. You know, they can get their license suspended or revoked and things like that. And coincidentally, this was just a few weeks ago, I got reached out by the New Jersey Department of Health, and they got to me before I had to go looking for them.
No, it just concerned me. We rely on these reports or this information or the licensing. I mean, just that's what we
You know,
rely
I'm
on.
hoping that these things are being, you know, that law enforcement's doing what they're supposed to do and notifying those agencies when these issues happen. I didn't even know how they found out
So
that
that's
she
what I'm
was arrested
concerned
and
about, this
charged.
lack of communication. So,
To be honest, you know, when I arrested and charged her, you know, the complaints go in the computer system, they go into state databases. I don't know where that agency, how that agency was notified that this person was charged. I don't know what mechanism that is, but they somehow became aware that this person was charged with something that was related to her job.
so the next week they could have sent her elsewhere to someone else's home.
She was, as far as I know, she was, the agency that she worked for, she suspended her.
So they were notified. Okay.
Thank you. Tracy?
One of the other things that we see in the county, we have a Department of Consumer Affairs, which touches on other issues regarding seniors when they fall prey to a vendor or a contractor. And so I wanted to make everyone in this room aware that we have the service. This year alone, we have recouped $350,000 back to victims who have been scammed by, you know, the person who shows up and said, well, you haven't paid me for that plumbing service, and then they write another check because they forgot that they actually paid them already. And so we have that service at the county. So in addition to that recoup, we've also had $400,000 worth of fines to people who were illegally preying upon senior citizens. So I just wanted everyone in the room to know that we have this service. If you or someone who you love is something you suspect, we have law enforcement, retired law enforcement people employed in this agency. It's the Department of Consumer Affairs in Bergen County. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Okay.
Just as a follow-up,